So what is up people, welcome to the second video of this series Docker for developers, and in this video we are going to talk about Docker architecture, Docker main components, and we will see what exactly are images and containers. So now let's talk about some advantages of Docker. So first advantage is no pre-allocation of RAM. As we discussed in the previous video, we don't need to pre-allocate any resources if we want to create any Docker container, but while creating a virtual machine we need to pre-allocate some resources. The second benefit is CI efficiency. Docker enables you to build a container image and use the same image across every step of the deployment process. It means once you create a Docker image, then you can use the Docker image everywhere, wherever you want while deploying your application. The next advantage of Docker is less cost. Because of Docker is an open source platform, then you can use it for free. The next benefit is it is light in weight because we don't need to pre-allocate any resources while developing our application or while building a Docker container for our application, so it is light in weight. It can run on physical hardware, virtual machine, or on the cloud. So basically means that just you need to install Docker anywhere, like on a physical hardware or a virtual hardware. If you want to run Docker on cloud, you just need to install Docker and you can run any Docker image or Docker container. You can reuse your image, so you just need to create an image or build an image so you can use everywhere and every time, anytime you want to use that image. The next benefit is it took very less time to create a container. As we seen previously, it took very less time to create a container. We just need to run a command and it takes few of seconds to create a container from an image. So now let's talk about some disadvantages of Docker. So Docker is not a good solution for applications that require rich GUI. Just like if you are developing a video game, then that requires a very high graphics. So Docker will not be a good solution for that application. The second disadvantage is it is difficult to manage large amount of containers, but there are many solutions in markets now, so you can orchestrate your containers like Kubernetes and Docker Swarm. Docker does not provide cross-platform compatibility, means like if an application is designed to run in a Docker container on Windows, then it cannot run on Linux or vice versa, right? You need to build your image for compatibility of your host operating system, right? Docker is suitable when the development operating system and testing operating system are same, right? But if your operating systems are different, then you should use virtual machine. And no solution for data recovery and backup in Docker, so it is another disadvantage of Docker. So now let's talk about Docker architecture and Docker main components. So as we know, Docker is a complete ecosystem of some components. So Docker main components are like Docker client, Docker hub, Docker daemon, and Docker server. So Docker daemon is basically means the Docker server, or as you can say Docker engine also. And we have Docker images and Docker container. So let's talk about each of them, like what is Docker client and what is Docker hub and what is daemon, what is image and what is a container. So if you see here, let's talk about Docker client. As it says that when a client runs any server command on the Docker client terminal, the client terminal sends these commands to the Docker daemon. So basically we use Docker client to interact with Docker daemon or Docker server. So it is possible for Docker client to communicate with more than one daemon. Docker client uses commands and REST APIs to communicate with the Docker daemon. Docker users can interact with Docker daemon through a client. So when we run any Docker command using Docker, so that means we are interacting with Docker daemon, and we interact with Docker daemon with the help of Docker client. So when we run a command like docker run hello world, so that docker means we are referring to Docker client and we are saying Docker client, hey Docker client, please send this request to Docker server or Docker daemon that we want this from Docker server, like we want to run this container or this image from the Docker server. Now let's talk about Docker daemon. So as we know, Docker daemon runs on the host operating system. It is responsible for running containers to manage Docker services. Only Docker daemon runs containers, but Docker client only request the Docker daemon that okay, so hey Docker daemon, run this container. The client requesting for this, right? And Docker daemon can communicate with other daemons also. As we know, with Docker client, we can communicate with more than one daemon, and Docker daemon can communicate with other Docker daemons also. So let's talk about what is Docker Hub. So it is basically, you can refer like it is a Docker registry where your images are stored just like we store our code on GitHub. So Docker registry manages and stores the Docker images. There are two types of registry. One is public and one is private. So on public registry, it is basically like Docker Hub where your open source images are there, like your Node.js image, your MySQL image. All the images are for free for your use, and you can directly pull them and use them. But some are private registry. It is used to share images within an enterprise. Like if you are developing an application and your application is completely private and you want to create an image for that, so you can store those images or your private images into a private registry. So you can store them in AWS container registry or GCR like Google Cloud Container Registry. Now let's talk about Docker images. What are Docker images? Docker images are read-only binary templates used to create Docker containers or single file with all dependencies and configuration required to run a program. So Docker images are basically a template, you can say, that stores or that holds all the dependencies, specifications and configuration that are required to run your container, right? And how you can create a Docker image? You can create a Docker image from a Docker file, and you can directly pull the image from Docker Hub also, and you can create an image from existing Docker container. Suppose you are working on a Docker container inside a Docker container, but you want to save your work into a Docker image, so you can create an image from your existing Docker container also. So now let's talk about Docker container. Docker container is nothing, just a running state of your image. So container hold the entire packages that needed to run the application, or in other words, we can say that image is a template and the container is a copy of that template. So basically the whole configuration that is designed or that is given inside your Docker image, when you run that image, so that forms a container. So inside a container, it is a copy of that image or that template, right? So container is like a virtual machine, but it is not a virtual machine, but you can imagine that it is like a virtual machine. So images become container when they run on Docker engine. So whenever you run that Docker run hello world, so hello world is an image, but when you run that, so that becomes a container. So now let's see what is the architecture of Docker. It is basically a client server architecture. When we run any Docker command, it uses Docker client. So when we run any Docker run or Docker build, Docker pull, so our Docker client send a request to Docker host, and Docker host means our Docker daemon, and then our daemon or our Docker server search for those images like what we have requested to it, and it will see if images are exist on local, so it will create directly the container from it, and if images are not there in our local, then it will search those images in the registry, and then it will pull those images from the registry and create the container from it. So that is your Docker architecture. So that's all for today's video. In the next video, we will see how we can run Docker commands through Docker client, and we will see all the basic commands of Docker, and we will try hands-on those commands on the terminal. So if you like this video, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.